This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Israel's assault on Gaza has exacted a devastating toll, with over 25,000 people killed, 63,000 wounded, 1.7 million at least displaced. Among the consequences of the offensive is the decimation of Gaza's economy. Even before the latest Israeli assault on Gaza began over 3 months ago, Gaza's economy was already crumbling, the result of a 15-year-long siege on the territory enforced by Israel and Egypt. Now, with vast swaths of Gaza destroyed by the Israeli military and severe restrictions on humanitarian aid coming in, more than 500,000 people are facing catastrophic hunger. That's according to the United Nations. Meanwhile, Israel's withholding millions in taxes collected on behalf of Palestinians earmarked for Gaza. On Sunday, Israel approved a plan to send those tax revenues, it's frozen since November, to Norway, to be held in escrow instead of the Palestinian Authority. While the PA was ousted from Gaza in 2007, many of its public sector workers kept their jobs and continue to be paid with transferred tax revenues that are being held by Israel, further exacerbating the crisis in Gaza. For more, we're joined by Raja Khalidi. He's the Director General of the Palestine Economic Policy Research Institute, joining us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Raja, thanks so much for being with us. If you can start off by talking about whose money is this, and talk about the amount that's supposed to go to Gaza and to the West Bank, and how Israel has control over it. Why do they have control over it?
Thanks a lot, Amy, and for this chance to talk with you. Before plunging into the dirty details of the economics of this war, I just want to say a word of tribute to the journalists like Akram. So many of them who've been reporting, who've been shocking us every day. And what is more shocking, and we're talking about millions of us watching, listening around the world here in the rest of Palestine. What is most shocking is that they're able to still do their job so well and so professionally. So, I mean, we'll come back to Gaza, but really, you know, you don't need an economist to tell you what's happened to the economy of Gaza. We just heard a lot. It tells so much of a story. The entanglement of Palestinian authorities' public finances with Israel goes back to Oslo. Funnily enough, it's come back home to Oslo, in the sense that this was all part of an arrangement made for a 5-year period whereby Israel was allowed, because of de facto, when Oslo agreements were signed, to control the collection of Palestinian external trade taxes at its borders, because it, of course, controls all the Palestinian trade, both that trade that comes from Israeli economy as well as from around the world. So that set up a mechanism called the clearance mechanism, whereby all of the recorded imports through Israel or from Israel to the PA are calculated and handed over on a monthly basis to the Palestinian Authority. Now, this was a suitable arrangement in the interim period that was supposed to end in 2000, but then it was perpetuated because nothing else took its place since then, but gradually interpreted unilaterally by Israel in its own, according to its own financial security and political interest. So from early on, this mechanism became one of the weapons, if you wish, of economic warfare and pacification or warfare, so carrot or a stick, that Israel has used in its relationship with Palestinian economy, with Palestine, with the Palestinian people. Now, that has entailed over the years, especially in the last 5 or 6 years, unilateral deductions that Israel makes. So it makes reductions for electricity consumption that it claims has not been paid, for water, sewage, etc. treatment, and for other medical referrals to Israeli hospitals. And then, which something the PA came to accept because it had no fiscal leverage against Israel. And then in the last 5 years, Israel, of course, has been deducting sums equivalent to what the PA pays to the prisoners and martyrs' families. Again, at loud protest by the PA, but with little effect This is an issue that the Norwegians, the AHLC, the IMF have been seized with for years, but nobody has done anything about. So this recent unilateral decision by an extremist settler government to deduct what they claim is the equivalent of what the PA continues to pay salaries to its former, employees, but who are not mainly working in the West Bank, is something that what can we expect the PA to do? It tried to reject it out of principle, but on the other hand, it's collapsing. Its fiscal situation is near disastrous. So exactly what this entails, this escrow account, if it means that the PA can say, well, at least Israel is not holding the money that it illegally deducted, and we reject totally its deduction, hence we'll take the rest. Okay, that's going to allow it to stumble through the next couple of months, perhaps make some new, refinancing, debt refinancing deals, et cetera, with the banking system, and eventually hope that when things calm down, Smotrich will allow the Norwegians to release the funds, which again is perhaps somewhat fantastical. Perhaps it's better to say it's better to have the Norwegians holding it, but that's it. It doesn't really change the equation, except that it deblocks a certain amount of Palestinian trade revenue. On the other hand, we got to realize that this trade revenue is directly linked to the level of economic activity. And the level of economic activity in the West Bank has collapsed. Not as much, of course, as Gaza, which is now a non-economy, in fact. But in the West Bank, it's been more about the return of workers from Israel and what they are no longer spending in the local economy for 4 months. The cutoff of clearance revenues, but most importantly is the general reduction in economic activity means that we're importing less. So if we're importing less, there's less revenue. So the average monthly revenue is going down regardless of Israeli deductions.
So talk about the effects on the ground of not having this money, and who exactly in the current government is deciding who gets what. You talk about Smotrich, there's Ben-Gvir, of course, there's Netanyahu. What's happening with what's happening in the West Bank, what's happening in Gaza, and where does the U.S. stand on this? And that's a critical question, because the U.S. actually can exert so much control, given, as one Israeli general said, that almost all of their weapons are from the United States, that they could not move ahead with what they're doing with Gaza without U.S. support.
It's arguable as to how much control the United States actually has on this government to begin with. But regardless of that, we know that if it doesn't want, the United States does not want to exercise any serious influence on this file, for example. All it was able to do is to come up with this Norway escrow account deal, which doesn't really do anything because it's not going to be compensated. It says that the money can neither be transferred to the PA nor used as a loan to the PA. Now, maybe it's going to mean that the PA can borrow, which it should be able to do because it's supposedly a government, on, internationally to fund part of its deficit. But that's, again, another stopgap measure. So the PA there's very few decision makers on this in the Palestinian Authority. There's the president and the prime minister and the minister of finance, and they're going and coming, I presume, with the different interlocutors to try and come up with something that keeps the Treasury able to pay part of its salaries bill. The salary bill in the West Bank is about $4 billion for a year, which is about 80% of the public budget. So that has already been cut prior to the war because of other reasons, because of the deductions that we mentioned. So salaried employees are receiving less, paying less able to repay their debts, which they've taken out in extreme ways, or private consumption debts over the last 5-6 years in the good times, so to speak. And then you have all of that reduction in aggregate demand from the purchasing power and aggregate demand. And then you have the workers who've returned from Israel, 180,000 people, maybe 150,000 of whom were sitting in their villages and camps waiting for something to happen, and nothing is happening. There's very few alternative jobs in the local market to begin with. They had become lazy, if you wish, or the labor force had become dependent, let's say, on this option of working in Israel, which brings in 2 to 3 times local wages. So there's a major transformation undergoing in the local economy. We're going to see extreme poverty increasing in the West Bank, which was less severe incidents in the past than Gaza, for example. We're going to see growing social deprivation and inability of the PA doesn't have any money hardly to pay its salaries, much less to provide services to the poor. I mean, education system is continuing, but it's starting to be hobbled, and so on and so forth. So there's a gradual, I don't want to call it a collapse of the Palestinian Authority's ability to deliver its services, but certainly a retraction and entrenchment.
Let me ask you about the labor situation, because so many thousands of Palestinians worked in Israel. Israel's looking to address the major labor shortage because they're not allowing Palestinians from the occupied territories to work in Israel. But by recruiting tens of thousands of people from India at a time when Palestinians have long played a crucial role in Israeli construction and other sectors who are now barred. Israeli authorities say they're hoping to see 10 to 20,000 Indian migrant workers in the coming months, a deal that's being worked out with Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India. What about this?
Well, look, I mean, we're 10 to 20,000 is not going to really do anything except perhaps get the next agricultural season crop in and build a few buildings that have been waiting to be completed. Palestinians, there were approximately 90,000, 85,000 Palestinians of the total 180. More than half of them were working in 80,000. More than half of them were working in Israeli construction. So our labor force is highly dependent on the Israeli Construction Center, and the Israeli Construction Center is highly dependent on our labor. So replacing a part of that, stopgap measure. Agriculture, I believe they're trying to do something similar with workers from Africa. But, there's a reason that unlike, let's say, Gulf states and many Arab Gulf states, the Asian labor force en masse has built the Gulf countries, if you wish. Israel does not want to find itself in that situation. And that's because, the exploitation of Palestinian labor is easy. They're next door, they go home at night, and they're not gonna make trouble. On the other hand, the idea of, and Israel is culturally is not very, open and tolerant to people of color, even, Jews and Palestinians of color. So I think that these Asian and wherever they might come from, African workers are going to face a lot of issues in the discrimination in what is really an apartheid, if you wish, labor market. Palestinians from the West Bank had a certain position. Prior to the war, 20,000 Ghazawis were allowed in and were working. So there's this sort of hierarchy, and then you have Arabs in Israel who are slightly higher up the occupational ladder, but et cetera, et cetera. So where are these Asian workers who are not going to go home at night, where they're going to, how they're going to use them, integrate them, except in a short-term wartime type economy? I don't think it's a viable option. But the other option of Israel, you mentioned Smotrich. He's one of those who are, dead against such a return of Palestinian labor to into Israeli markets. So, they can't have their cake and eat it too. And I would hope that, a certain amount, I think, for sure, a certain number will be allowed in gradually, but I fear that it will be in chain gang-like circumstances, with high security around them, only a few hours, et cetera, et cetera. And there'll be a lot of room for exploitation by bosses and contractors and people who issue permits and things like that. So, I think that's the way that one is going to play out.
Finally, we just have a minute, but Raja Khalidi, you're sitting there in Ramallah. The occupied West Bank, the Israeli military has raided Ramallah, Bethlehem, Jenin repeatedly, as well as many other areas. If you could just describe what it's like living there on the ground, not to mention what's happening in Gaza, and if you see any kind of end of this violence in sight.
It's frightening. I mean, I haven't left Ramallah for the last 4 months except 3 times, and many people are living, sheltering in place. 350,000 Palestinians in Jerusalem have not left Jerusalem for the last 4 months, whereas they're usually coming and going to Ramallah and around West Bank all the time. So there is a sense of fear, of lack of mobilization, except at the very local level. There is no national authority that is engaging and confronting either the settler attacks or the expansion of settlements. We're seeing settlements, outposts and roads popping up every day on the roads between the major Palestinian cities. Roadblocks have increased from 550 before the war to 700, and so on and so forth. I had never lived in Palestine under such circumstances. For me, I'm perhaps have a greater access, etc., but it's not easy for anybody. And for people trying to get to work, people trying to get to hospitals, and then there is the violence. You never know when, if you go down the wrong road, some settler gang will stone your car, burn it, whatever. That's not to mention the Israeli army's campaign. And against, you mentioned very correctly, several cities have been devastated, tens of millions of dollars of infrastructure, basically mini Ghazas in Jenin, Nablus, and Tulkarm. And I think that's intentional. It's sending a message, and it's telling us what's in store for us if anybody raises their head. And to be honest, Gaza is a total catastrophe, but it could get worse if they continue in the West Bank. So if we get to a ceasefire, I hope it's a comprehensive one, and it's not only hostilities in Gaza, because we're at the precipice of a warlike situation in the West Bank, and we don't have any resistance fighters in the sense that Gaza has, let's say. So it's really everybody in the West Bank who's going to be drawn into this if things go bad.
Raja Khalidi is the Director General of the Palestine Economic Policy Research Institute.